What we find is two important aspects for the return of the Nephilim. This first is a certain bloodline. So there was a bloodline that was believed to have been of Nephilim descent and which came through the deluge. The second is that within the framework of this bloodline, certain rituals were enacted during which certain gods was made, according to this tradition then, to be reborn on earth.
If the flood destroyed the Nephilim, why does Genesis say they appeared again after the flood? What does it tell us about the future return of the Nephilim? So, Willie, before we talk about how they return, can you explain what Genesis 6 verse 4 actually says about the Nephilim being on the earth before and also after the flood?
Yes, Labai. So Genesis 6 is one of two passages in the Bible that refers to the Nephilim. And what is particularly interesting about this passage is that it links the Nephilim with the period of just before the flood, before the Great Deluge, when the human race became particularly wicked and sinful. And the Nephilim are connected to this period of wickedness. It seems that the biblical description in Genesis 6 verse 1 to 4 is actually the reason the Nephilim is mentioned is because of their role in this wickedness of man. For example, we see in verse 5, when the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent and the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And then we find that this is actually the reason for the flood.
So that's also emphasized in the book of Enoch as well.
Exactly. So what we find in the book of Enoch is that the Nephilim in the time before the deluge, the great reason for God sending the deluge is as a judgment on the Nephilim. So this is a kind of idea that connects with Genesis 6, verse 1 to 4, where the Nephilim plays an important role in this wickedness that came in the time before the deluge. And again, every time that we read about the Nephilim, also in the time after the deluge, we'll discuss that today, and also in the end times, again, the Nephilim will be closely linked to the particular wickedness of the time before the second coming of Jesus Christ. Yep. So that's why Jesus, for example, said it was just like, it will be just like the time of Noah. So that was when the Nephilim was on the scene, and we will discuss the return of the Nephilim in great detail. Yeah.
So Willie, when you read the Bible, it says the Nephilim were destroyed in the flood. So that creates a bit of a chronological problem. It's interesting they were destroyed and then they appear afterwards. And I think people need to just be aware of that little chronological issue. And I think it refers to those two little points, just to emphasize that we have to take it seriously. Do you agree with my comment?
Yeah, so this is a real problem. And scholars have been struggling with this for some time. Why do we find the Nephilim after the deluge if they were destroyed by the deluge?
Yes.
So clearly God's judgment was on the Nephilim, and from the biblical perspective, they did not survive the flood. So how did they return? So that is the major question that we're looking in today, and also in the next episode. So what we find, for example, we've discussed biblical and extra-biblical traditions on this channel quite extensively. So what we find in the extra-biblical tradition in ancient Sumer, where the flood, we connect the flood with the mud layer that was discovered by Sir Woolley at Ur, and that was also found at Uruk, at Eridu, and at other places in the area, even as far as Elam. So when the sea actually overran the land, it was a massive flood. And after that flood came the Uruk period, and especially the ruling house of Uruk, of whom we read in the Sumerian king list. So the first dynasty of Uruk is particularly interesting and very important for our discussion. And we've discussed them in the previous 2 episodes when we discussed Nimrod in great detail. So what we find with regard to the house of Uruk is that they were said to have been descended from the gods. They were scions of the gods. And we connect one of these kings, these Uruk kings, in Merkar with the biblical Nimrod. The consonants in the name NMR in the names are the same. And we know that vowels change all the time when names are handed down. So, and there are many other things, and we discussed that in great detail in the previous episode. So what we find is the biblical house of Cush, or Ham, from which Nimrod descended, and the extra-biblical, the Sumerian tradition. In both cases, this house ruled Uruk, the city of Uruk. That was the great city in the time after the deluge. So, if this, what we find in Sumerian tradition, that they were descended from the gods, clearly the same would have been true with regard to the house of Nimrod. And that's why Nimrod actually could also be regarded as a Nephilim, as we have already discussed in the previous episodes. So what we find is there was a lineage that came through the flood and which resulted in this house of Cush having been of Nephilim descent. So this is the first important point. There's bloodline, a certain bloodline that survived the flood. And the other thing that's of importance is that within the framework of this bloodline, we should understand the Tower of Babel events. Now, the centerpiece of the Tower of Babel events was the sacred marriage ritual. So we discussed the Edfu text, another very ancient tradition about the Nephilim, especially with regard to Egypt. We made an entire episode about that. And in this case, we read how certain shamans after the deluge went about with certain rituals to bring those gods that resided on earth in the time before the deluge, that died as a consequence of the deluge, back to earth. And so there was 8 gods. They were the seed of the fallen seed of the earth god. And they wanted to bring them back in the time after the deluge, especially also the 9th one. He was a messianic child. We discussed him in great detail in a previous episode.
Yes.
He was known for his shining face. Where shining doesn't really refer to, shining like a light that is shining, but more to a terrible brilliance that was associated with his genius. So his spirit or guardian spirit were regarded as divine, and that's why he was ascribed this brilliance. Now, in Sumerian tradition, we find exactly the same. We find that the god Enki, a lord of the earth, that's what his name means, his seed fell on the ground, and from that, eventually it so happened that 8 gods and goddesses were born. In both cases, it's 4 pairs of gods and goddesses in both the Egyptian and the Sumerian tradition. So what we find is that these gods that lived in the time before the deluge, after the deluge, there was an effort to bring them back again, and to bring them back via the sacred marriage ritual. So, for example, we find that the 7 gods that was associated with they were called the Sabiti, and they were associated with the Pleiades, the 7 stars. They were born on earth as 7 young men that accompanied Lugalbanda, the great Lugalbanda, who was king just after Enmerkar or Nimrod, according to the Sumerian king list. And then the one that came after them was Dumuzi. He was the 8th one. He is also said to have been born in this way. And what is interesting in the Sumerian king list, Dumuzi is mentioned as having lived before the deluge and again now after the Great Flood. So here we have these 8. And then the 8 gods that returned. And then the 9th one, corresponding with the messianic child of the Egyptian tradition, was none other than Gilgamesh. And we will come back to Gilgamesh and have an intense and detailed discussion about him, but he is the archetype of the Nephilim. He was a messianic figure. He's also in one of his great epics described as exhibiting this terrible brilliance. And he was, as we know, believed to have been 2/3 a god. So his genius, again, was believed to have been 2/3 a god. And he was born from the sacred marriage. That's clearly stated in ancient Sumerian tradition. His father was a high priest, but he's also described as a daimon. And his mother was most likely Ninsun, the daughter of Enmerkar, later regarded as a goddess. So what we find is 2 important aspects for the return of the Nephilim. This first is a certain bloodline. So there was a bloodline that was believed to have been of Nephilim descent and which came through the deluge. The second is that within the framework of this bloodline, certain rituals were enacted during which certain gods was made, according to this tradition then, to be reborn on earth. And they then were the Nephilim in the time after the deluge. Yeah. There were definitely also other similar cases, if we discuss the House of Uruk in great detail, but these are the most important. This is the most important tradition about the return of the Nephilim in the Sumerian tradition in the time after the flood.
Yes, wonderful. I'm really interested in Dumuzi as a person, and especially because he existed before and after the flood. So the next episode we should probably touch base on Dumuzi the shepherd and Dumuzi the fisherman.
And Dumuzi returned again in the he returned again in the form of Sargon the Great. That was what was believed, the founder of the great Akkadian Empire, and we will come to that. So Dumuzi is very important in our story, yes.
So Willie, I want to throw a curveball your way. Many people assume the Nephilim after the flood were the same beings from before the flood. Why do you specifically believe they were a new generation rather than survivors?
Yeah, so as I've said, the flood, according to the biblical tradition, God used the flood to destroy the Nephilim. And in the time after the deluge, because the Nephilim from the time before fell under God's judgment, they died. And those that came after the deluge then were from these bloodlines that I have discussed, and they returned via these sacred marriage rituals. And they then again lived on earth according to Sumerian and biblical tradition, because as the Bible said, they lived in the time before as well as after the deluge. The deluge is in Genesis 6. It's discussed just after this passage in Genesis 6. So that was part of the judgment because of the sinfulness of humankind in that period.
Genesis 6 verse 4 also, it creates that anticipation of another appearance because it says, and also afterward.
And we will, in the next episode, we will actually link that to the curse of Ham, of Canaan.
Yes.
But we will come to that and discuss that in great detail, yes.
Yes. So really, besides Genesis, what other biblical passages help us identify the post-flood Nephilim as well as their descendants?
Yeah, so the other important passage, actually the only other passage in the Bible where we find reference to the Nephilim, is in Numbers 13, towards the end of this chapter. And we read how the Israelite spies went into the southern parts of the land of Canaan, and there they encountered these giants. We read that here in chapter 13, verse 33, there we saw the Nephilim. The descendants of Anak came from the giants, and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. Now, here we have reference to the descendants of Anak, or the sons of Anak. Now, Anak is actually just a variation on Enoch, and the shift of the vowel implies that this name most likely originated from Enoch in Ki. So in Ki, originally it was his seed that fell on the ground, as we've just discussed, and from which were born the Nephilim. So here we find exactly the same tradition, referred to as the Anakim, and they were called Nephilim. So they were those that the fallen ones, from the fallen ones born from that fallen seed, yes.
Yeah, and the term that's actually used, or the Hebrew term, is Nephilim, and they were also described as powerful and large. And in Numbers, they say, we saw the descendants of giants there. Really, the other thing that I just wanted to...
And they must have been quite large,
yeah,
because we read that they saw themselves as grasshoppers in their eyes.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So the other thing I wanted to ask you, there's some other giant people that get referred to as well, the Rephaim, the Emim, the Zamzumim. Any other comment about that? And this also makes me think about Goliath of Gath.
Yeah, so the Anakim in the Bible is then connected with the Rephaim and all these other groupings that you've mentioned. And we'll return in time when we discuss that particular age. We'll come and we will discuss those groups in great detail.
Yeah.
But the Rephaim is especially important. If you are enjoying the podcasts and would like to explore these topics in more depth, you might enjoy my books. Book 1 of the trilogy covers the early period we're discussing right now and goes into much greater detail. You can find all my books on Amazon. Thanks for your support. Now, the terminology, the term Rephaim, it's actually an Amorite term.
Yes.
And it's not an ethnic term. So it's not ethnicity that was implied by Rephaim. It's not a particular ethnic group. It was a general terminology that we find here.
Category. So broader category.
Yeah, that referred
giant people
to the diamonds. It was just the word for diamonds. It corresponds, for example, in ancient Mesopotamia, we had the Lama or Lamassu in Akkadian, and we had the Shedu. And in biblical tradition, we had the Shedim, which came from Shedu. Those are equivalent terms to the Rephaim. So now Rephaim is particularly, as I've said, a more Amorite term. And the term has been found not only in the Bible, but also in the Ugarit texts that discovered in the city of Ugarit and dating back to about 1400 to 1200 BC, and also in Phoenician tradition. So now the Rephaim, there were 3 categories of Nephilim. The one group were the giants. The Bible discusses that. And then the other groups, they were kings, ancient kings. So these diamonds are actually the spirits of deceased kings. We've discussed the house of Uruk, those great kings, Nimrod or Enmerkar. So these spirits were the spirits that, according to this tradition, were venerated as the great heroes of the past. And they had a leader. He was in this Mesopotamia, in the Ugarit text, he's called MLK, or which means king, and also king of old. So he was the king of old, and most likely this reference is to Naram-Sin, the grandson of Sargon the Great, who was the leader of these diamonds in the netherworld. And we'll return to that and discuss that in great detail. So the Anakim was one group among the Nephilim, and they were known for, most likely, we've associated them with the wearers of neck rings, the porteurs des stork, that we find in Ugarit, Byblos, and other cities in that area. So there are no doubt, according to the Bible, that the Nephilim survived, were again on the earth in the time after the flood, great flood, not only in the early time after the deluge, but also later on in the land of Canaan.
Yeah. The word Rephaim reminds me of the word Rapha that we see in other writings as well.
Yeah, actually it is. Yeah, closely linked. Yeah.
Yeah. So Willie, why is it important to understand the difference between the Nephilim before the flood and those who appeared afterward?
Yeah, so if we understand the difference, it helps us to gain a better insight into how they return. So the fact that they were from certain bloodlines, Nephilim bloodlines, and certain cultural practices, especially the sacred marriage, were used to reincarnate them on earth, because these diamonds are not the same as human spirits. According to the Bible, human spirits, we will die once and then we will stand before God in the judgment. But these diamonds are of a different order, and they are reincarnated according to Mesopotamian and later on Canaanite and especially Greek tradition. And we find the same thing in the book of Revelation, where we find about the beast that will return. But we will come back to that and discuss that in great detail. So if we understand the return of the Nephilim in the time after the flood, we also gain insight in what it will be in the end of days when the Nephilim will return. So the Nephilim will return, and it will be a time of particular wickedness, and exactly in the same way as before the deluge. And this time God will judge the world. But this time it will be a judgment by fire, whereas the previous time it was by water.
Yeah, but
so if we understand...
Sorry, go ahead.
So if we understand how it happened that they returned in the time after the deluge, we also gain insight in what we can expect in the end of times when they return again. Yes.
Yeah.
So two things are important. Bloodlines, yes. Certain Nephilim bloodlines, and my 3 volumes are for the most part about those bloodlines, those families that claim descent from the Nephilim. And on the other hand, certain diamonds that are reborn or will be reborn according to this tradition and in this particular way of thinking within these families during that period.
So, Billy, do you think there's a cosmic clock ticking down?
Yes, the code. Yes, the cosmic codes. So we've discussed the cosmic code. So these things cannot happen anytime. According to the cosmic code, these things happened during the time of the Tower of Babel. That was a particular period when those things, according to the cosmic code, happened. And according to the cosmic code, there will be a particular time frame when it will happen again. So we'll come back to the cosmic code. We'll discuss this in detail, and the cosmic code, together with biblical prophecy, enable us to understand when these things will happen. Yeah.
And you're referring to Polaris and the precession and Tuban and everything else. Yeah.
Yeah, we're talking about the starry heavens.
Yeah.
And the Sumerians believed there's a certain writings of the skies, of the celestial skies.
Yeah.
And they were able to decrypt it, understand it. The sages, according to tradition, could read this writing. And later on in biblical tradition, we also read in the book of Isaiah and also in Revelation that the heavens is like a scroll. So clearly the wise men, the magi that came to the baby Jesus, they were able to read this biblical scroll or the writings in the celestial skies. And that is actually extremely important to understand the time when these things will happen.
Yeah. There's a time for all things and all things under the sun, eh?
Exactly.
Yeah,
appointed time. Appointed
time. Yes. I think the most important thing that I take away from our discussion now is that you have to realize You have to look at it pre-flood. You have to look at it post-flood, because if you don't, it creates basically a flattening of the biblical story and puts it into one single event.
Yeah.
Anything else you would like to comment on, or a thought you would like to leave us with?
Yeah, we will return to the return of the Nephilim in due course. But in the meantime, we are discussing so many aspects of their tradition, and all these details and particulars are important to gain a better understanding of the end times and how it will be in that period just before the return of Jesus Christ in the second coming. Yes.
Well, Willie, thank you very much, and thanks for your time. We really appreciate the insights. Understanding that the Bible describes both pre-flood and post-flood Nephilim, and it basically it changes how we read Genesis and helps us connect many of these ancient giant tribes mentioned throughout the Old Testament. So it was really interesting. Thank you very much. And I just want to mention that this was part one of a two-part episode. So I look forward to seeing you guys on the next one and continuing the discussion. But I do have one final question for our viewers. Do you guys think Genesis is describing one group of Nephilim, or does it point to two separate events? Tell us what you think in the comments. I really appreciate your time. And thank you, Vinny.